Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar EN 5600, jointly presented by the DDA and TÜViT. First of all, a short introduction. My name is Stijn Grove. I'm the MD for the Dutch Data Center Association, also board member for the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, member of the Dutch Standard Committee, and coordinator of the European National Trade Association table. With me presenting is Joachim Valhaber. He's Global Product Manager for Data Centers of TÜViT. And Joachim, very glad that we can jointly present here. Could you tell us a little bit more about TÜViT?
Hi, Stijn. TÜViT is a subsidiary of TÜV North. And we are about 200 people who offer services in IT security projects. And I have 2 or 3 slides during my talk to give you a little bit more insight of TÜViT.
Perfect, thank you very much. Okay, also who is presenting will be Niek van der Pas. Niek is the chair of the Dutch Standard Committee, the NEN, Computerruimtes en Datacenters, but he's also works for Legrand Minkels, where he is the lead data center expert and the coordinator in Europe for the data center standards for Legrand. He's an active contributor to the EN 5600 and ISO IEC data center standards, and he's author of the design PUE. So very glad to have him on the webinar to also present, especially on the sustainability part. And what are we going to present? This will be the program from 1500 to 1630. So I will start with an overview of data center trends, what we see in the Netherlands, but what is also seen in Europe, the impact of the data center standards, why we need the data center standards and why are they becoming more and more important. Then Joachim will take over and he will give an overview of the EN 5600 in general, from definition to classification, certification, outlook on the ISO 22237, and how TÜViT addresses the EN 5600 in its services. Also, after that, we will have a data center sustainability and EN 5600, specifically the sustainability part, presented by Niek van der Pas. From 1630 to 1700, we will have a Q&A. Questions can be asked during the presentations, all the presentations, via the chat window. We have Zoe Derksen, who is in the background managing this webinar, and she will summarize the questions, and we will then, during the Q&A sessions, answer your question. So we will first do the presentations and afterwards the Q&A. Also, during the Q&A, if you have a specific question, then you can ask the question via the raise hand option, and that is below in the Zoom window option bar. The webinar will be recorded, and this video will be shared afterwards, including the presentations in PDF format. So for now, I would like to say enjoy, and I will kick off with data center trends. And I will do that by this week we launched our new report focusing on the trends that we see in the Netherlands, which also are seen in everywhere in Europe and beyond. And that is data centers are becoming more important, especially now looking at the post-corona world. We need data centers more than ever. Working from home to AI, we're getting more into digitization, digital transformation, and we need a good, sound digital foundation to do whatever we need to do to run our economy, to work from home, to learn and to enjoy and relax. The effects of COVID-19. Well, basically, what we have seen is all of a sudden we had to work from home. And where countries have a good digital foundation, you see that they were easiest to adapt to the new normal. Inside the data center, we saw continued growth of workloads that move into the cloud. So on the one hand, we see a continued move in terms of digital transformation, in terms of the move to the cloud. And especially looking at regional data centers, they benefit from also the budget constraints here. We saw that during COVID, there is also a growth in the customers of regional data centers that wanted to offload their on-premise location and wanted to go fully aligned, but with the control within a data center near to them. So looking at COVID-19, it accelerated the digital transformation, and it made the data centers more important. Data centers are important also to recovery of our economy. If you look at the Dutch Central Bureau of Planning, that they expect that after or in a post-corona world, we will still work from home. So something has really changed permanently, and technology will play a more and more greater role in the new normal. And this is something that has changed and will not go back. It will change everything in terms of office space, in terms of the programs that we use, in terms of how we work with each other. This has changed tremendously. So the future of work is really all around digital. And all the major research companies say that this will persist into the future and will become really important in terms of the roadmap to recovery. Also, if you look at the Dutch economy, a very much service-like economy with a strong digital infrastructure, you see that this infrastructure, this strong digitization, helped to lower the effects of the downfall, and that showed that the Dutch economy was hit, well, not very much, only minus 3.8%, and is expected to return to its normal as one of the soonest earliest of all countries in the world, this World Economic Forum. So a digital infrastructure is really important to have on your soul, to have in your country. So the importance of data centers, of digital infrastructure, has been highlighted by this pandemic. If you look at then also the industry footprint, it's becoming more and more bigger. And if you look at the Netherlands only, a lot of investment, but also a lot of added value, only looking at the digital infrastructure, the data center infrastructure. Looking also at the energy transition, it doesn't have direct CO2 emissions. So it's also a sector for the future, an industry of the future, with a low footprint of land, and only in the Netherlands 0.3% of the total energy use. So that's very limited. 7,000 FTE work directly and indirectly to multi-tenant and hyperscale data centers. Added to the people working in also enterprise data centers, you have 11,000 people working there. So it's also not a small industry anymore. If you look at the data center floor, we have seen that it grew 6%. The number of facilities is going down for many years. Only the facilities are growing. So you see more and more concentration to larger data centers, to larger hyperscale data centers, larger hub data centers, larger regional data centers. And companies will have realized now that they will need to stop their on-premises IT and move to a data center, because that is where you can scale up better. You are more flexible. You can say goodbye to your office with that on-premise data center and move to a smaller facility. So it will enable you to lower your costs, but it will also bring you security and connections to cloud on-ramps, to other services that are from a data center. So it will provide you more security, more ability to adapt to the new normal. You see a large concentration in the Netherlands, but also in Germany with Frankfurt, also in the UK with London, a lot of concentration around the hubs, so around Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, and a lot of plans for new data center space in the coming years. And there's a lot of growth also outside the hub. So 1/3 of the growth in the Netherlands is outside the hub. And you see it also in, for instance, Germany, that you see now the tier 2 cities are coming in, and a lot of growth in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Munich, next to Frankfurt, which is still the large international hub. The challenges, if you look at really the hub space, so there's a lot of challenges in terms of power. The concentration of data centers in clusters on the energy grid is giving challenges. And recently also Frankfurt announced, the city of Frankfurt, that it had constraints in terms of the data center growth. Also still a very important issue is finding sufficiently qualified technical staff. We need more engineers to work within the data center. The data center growth is needing more people. We see more legislation. And so we're used to be a black box, under the radars industry, but we're getting more and more into the view of the legislators, and we need to be aware of that. And that is also why we need standards, because we need KPIs. We need a legislation that makes sense, and with standards, with clarifying what we do, how we do it, it is better to create, or it's easier to create better legislation. Challenges in the region is more on finding new customers. So that's real, that's the difference between the hub and the regional data centers, making data centers more sustainable, but also thirdly, finding sufficiently qualified technical staff. That's an issue everywhere. And you see that with the tremendous growth in countries that have large hubs, you see also some negative sentiments around data centers. They use all the energy, they use all the water. Media is exaggerating and is showing a sentiment which is, well, not factual, but it's hurting the data centers in general, while it only focuses on specific problems. So that is also a challenge. If you look at sustainability, that is also key, also in terms of looking at it from a European perspective. The European Committee is really focusing on the sustainability part, the 2050 goals. And the data center industry has now come together, and they created the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, and they have promised to become completely climate neutral by 2030. So that's a real one of the first green deals, together with the European Committee, working on really focusing on becoming climate neutral and also lowering all the resources needed within the data center. Looking at in the Netherlands, at this moment, we're at 88% of all the energy consumed by co-location data centers. They come from green sources. We expect to be 100% green in 2026, according to our research. Then if you look at residual heat, we're making progress there. It's been a long road there. We now have around 6,000 houses connected to heat networks. but a lot of projects are in the making, and it's finally now getting a pace that we wanted. Not everywhere it's possible, but there are some very challenging projects, especially in the municipality areas or in the city areas, suburban areas, where there are lots of concentration of apartment buildings, and which is ideal to use the heat. So we're moving there, and this is becoming also important, and also important to have good KPIs, to have good metrics, to be able to measure what goes out, how it's being used, and also if something of green energy is green and it's converted to heat, we need good definitions for that. Also water, it's been also in the media in the Netherlands, how much water data centers use. We tend to limit the amount of water or really go away from water. At this moment, only very limited amount of consumption. 0.0042% of the total Dutch water consumption. One of the projects was also in the news that in a hyperscale data center, Google in Groningen, they invested 41 million euros to create a whole water treatment facility that the whole industry in Groningen could use, and it was paid for by Google just to not use potable water, drinking water, but to use industry water. So this is a continuous focus on also from data centers. A lot of focus is also on the customer IT hardware, and this is also where standards are important, because you need to interface from the facility with the IT equipment. And it still uses if you look at the energy use, IT is using the most amount of power of the total power used in the data center. So if we can, there's a lot of focus on that, but also on recycling and how we can adjust cooling that is working together adjacently with the IT process that are running. But also there's focus on green software or green hardware and modular approaches, liquid cooling within the chip, within the server. So there's a lot going on also there, and a lot of attention there. It's also a challenge because to control that, to see how a customer is really using green software is something which is really at the starting blocks, but we need to also focus more and more on that. If you look at the European context, especially these are the flagship markets, so Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, and Paris, you see, tremendous growth that will continue, and only COVID has accelerated. The demand stays strong, so we're in a very good industry in terms of growth. In Amsterdam, we saw the effects of the moratorium, the building stop. We saw moderate growth, but we see continued demand now. So it's continued to go to here. We're one of the first with the moratorium, but you see now other cities like Singapore and Frankfurt, but also other areas where there are moratoriums, but we now have a policy in place to continue growth together with the municipality. But sustainability will become more important, and the challenge is finding enough power, working together with the grid. That's a real challenge, and will continue a challenge. The Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, I mentioned this before, an initiative of the European data center industry, and that's really in line with the European Commission's ambition to become CO2 neutral in 2050 or in 2030. We said 2030, but we need to do a couple of things. And it focuses on demonstration of energy efficiency. Well, you can imagine that we need standards for that. Purchase of 100% CO2-free energy. Prioritize water conservation. But also, so what are the KPIs? What are the efficiency KPIs? We need good KPIs. Recycling and repair of servers, and looking for ways to recycle heat. And also there you see the KPIs that are very important. In total, I think a lot of challenges. We're now expected to, at the end of June, there will be a policy paper published. We will have a direct meeting with the Ministry of Mr. Timmermans, one of the sustainability commissioners. And but this is really important. Visit www.climateneutraldatacenter.net, and there you can find more information. But this is really why we need good standards. So the impact of the standards for the energy transition in general, but there of course are many other issues where we need standards, but looking at the energy transition, we need KPIs. We need also clarification to create good policies, to good regulation that will fit to what we do, to make progress in terms of what everybody's doing, to align that, to work in a standard way. For research, that is also very important. And to, like I said, interfacing with other technologies, towards the grid in terms of energy, towards the IT from the facility side, towards residual heat in terms of heat networks. We need standards to make that interface possible, to make people understand each other. So this is really important. So for the introduction that I made and the trends that we're seeing, you can download also one thing, a standards guide that we have created with all the standards that are specifically going on in the industry, but also specifically in the Netherlands. So also looking at the NEN standards and all the standards that go beyond that. So you can download it here, it's in English. And our report, our latest report with all the trends can also be downloaded from our website, dutchdatacenters.nl. And without further ado, I then want to give the floor to Joachim. So Joachim will now go into the EN 5600 more in general. So thank you.
Stijn, thank you very much. I just have to share my screen. All right. So also good afternoon from me to the audience this afternoon. And well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the DDA making this event possible, and to the team of Stijn, so that we can conduct this webinar in this context. Well, I want to give you with my talk an insight into the EN 5600. I'm very pleased that I accompany the German EN 5600 working group from the very beginning, starting in 2010. And I want to share our thoughts on the EN 5600 from a certification body perspective. Of course, depending on your role, whether you are a consultant or a user, an operator of a data center, your opinions on the EN 5600 might differ a little bit, but I think there is a consent on a lot of things for the EN 5600, and I try to explain it with this talk. Well, first of all, as I mentioned beforehand, I want to give you some very short introduction to the TÜViT, and then we dig into the EN 5600 concerning its nature, its structure, its classification system, and what is going on with the EN 5600, and how do we deal with the EN 5600 on the evaluation and certification of data centers? And at the very end of my talk, I just want to address a little bit the sustainability, but here we have also Mr. Nick who will give you a more detailed view on that. All right, the TÜViT has a bunch of IT security services. Our focus topics are IT strategy and project management, the software evaluation and validation, like common criteria evaluations of the Microsoft SQL Server or ISO Server, for example. We do hardware evaluations. We are operating 4 hardware laboratories for that. We have a branch for signatures and identities, data privacy and information security management, as well as cybersecurity, and of course, data centers. And in the context of data center, we provide services since 2001. And with all these services, we address a lot of new developments on IoT, 5G, or artificial intelligence. We do that with 200 people. As I told before, we are a special task force of the TÜV North, a subsidiary of TÜV North. And here there are working physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, electrical engineers, as well as architects or mechanical engineers. We do our work. We are seeking for accreditations from different authorities and agencies. In Germany, for example, from the German accreditation body, as well as the Federal Network Agency or the German Banking Industry Committee. But we offer also our services abroad. And here we also hold international accreditations from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, something similar from Japan, from the NITE, from the Europay, MasterCard and Visa Consortium, and also in the Netherlands, the Betaalvereniging Nederland, and also in Singapore from the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. Here we have from year to year, of course, audits in order where our competence on all these fields are verified. And as I told, we have also an international business in these countries here, and about one fourth of our performance is provided abroad. Okay, that's about TÜViT. So now I would like to start with the EN 5600 and starting with its nature. And here we have to look in the part 1 of the standard, where it is mentioned for whom this standard is addressed. And it says that, it supports various parties who are involved in design of data centers, planning, procurement, integration, installation, operation, and maintenance. And these parties are, for example, owners, facility managers, consultants, suppliers, installers. And from a certification body point of view, we ask, of course, why are there not mentioned evaluators and inspection teams? They are missing. And well, I want to stress the point a bit more with the help of another standard. And this is the ISO 17007, because this standard describes and specifies how to draft a normative document. And the key features of here mentioned in this standard is that if you want to present a new standard, you should first of all make a separation of the requirements and specifications and an evaluation scheme. Then, of course, and I think that is quite clear, that your descriptions should be neutral, consistent, comprehensible for all parties, for all parties which are involved. So for the manufacturers, operators, users, or of course also for the evaluators. And the assessments you do with such an evaluation scheme must be comparable. And now if we look to the EN 5600, we will see, first of all, there is no evaluation scheme given to this standard. And of course, this makes it difficult to use the standard natively to make assessments on data centers. Concerning the second point, where it says should be written neutral, consistent, and comprehensible, I would say decide by yourself. From at the very beginning, the first release of the standard, of course, has, well, some deficiencies, of course. And now everybody in Europe tried to improve that, and the updates of the standards become better and better, of course. And concerning the assessments based on the EN 5600, our experience is that they differ. They differ because, first of all, it's difficult. There is no common evaluation scheme for the EN 5600. And they differ because there are different companies offering such an assessment. If we look to the EN 5600 and go a little bit deeper in each of the parts, then first of all, one can say the setup of the EN 5600 is a typical standard setup. If you look to the contents, it typically starts with the scope, with normative references, the definition of terms and abbreviations used in such a standard, and it also holds a conformance clause. This is very important because here you read what you have to do and what parts you have to fulfill of this part of the standard to be in conformance with the standard. And after that, there you will find all the sections describing the requirements or recommendations. So the setup is very typical for a standard. And also the wording you have in the standard recommendations, like the excerpt you see on top of the slide here, where it is said cabinets, racks, and frames should be aligned in rows. Computer rooms should not exceed 600 square meters. these are only recommendations in the standard, and they are not mandatory for the certification process. This is in contrast to requirements. Requirements use the wording shall, and the requirements have to be fulfilled for a certification. An example here is all open or rough surfaces shall be sealed to prevent dust particles being distributed. This is a strict requirement. So looking at the setup, the recommendations and requirements, we see that is a typical usage as in a lot of other standards. But we have a fourth part, and here I call them conditional requirements. These conditional requirements are based on customers' risk assessment. An example is given here where it says the resistance class 2 for intrusion protection shall be applied. So that isn't a requirement so far. But then the sentence continues with unless the risk assessment indicates a more stringent requirement. So it depends at the end on the customer's risk assessment. And that is one problem, one further problem for the auditors. That is the challenge to use the EN 5600 in assessments where each assessment of a data center should be comparable to each other. And the conclusion of all that is that one has to say that this standard is designed as a guideline. And even the convener speaks in the context of the EN 5600, the German convener of the German working group speaks in the context of EN 5600 from a guideline. So how can we circumvent this for an assessment of a data center where we try to make it more strict and more independent from the customer's risk assessment? So what we did is we created a criteria catalog. When we look at the EN 5600, it consists of several parts, and I will explain the parts a little bit later. But the major parts which are important for a certification project are those shown here on this slide. And I also try to show how many pages are used for each of these parts. If you count them, you will find that the relevant parts of the EN 5600 for certification are at least 351 pages. And of course, the interpretation of some requirements are difficult. And it's a real advantage to directly work for the German working group of the EN 5600, because you know every editor of the standard parts. So if you have some trouble with interpretation, we can go in direct contact with them and discuss some parts of the requirement or parts of the standard. And what we did is we filter out the requirements and we supplement them with our wording. So the 351 pages are concentrated on a criteria catalog, and we call that the TSI EN 5600 criteria catalog. It's very compact, comprehensive. It has streamlined all the requirements in the EN 5600, and it consists of our interpretation of the requirements. And at the very end, this is the document which is used for the assessment of the data center in order to confirm the conformance to the EN 5600. This booklet are just 39 pages. And we use this booklet to do our work, to conduct the inspection, to interpret all the documents, plans, and schematics of a data center, and to make our assessment, a judgment on that. The criteria catalog is set up in a way that it has all in all 9 criteria sections dealing with the environment, the construction, the technical fire protection, the security systems, the cabling, the power, air conditioning and ventilation, the facility management, which is here indicated by the org, organizational part, and the documentation. And this represents all the requirements of the EN 5600. Okay, let us have a look to the 5600 and its structure, and especially from where do we come during the last 10 years. That is, it has started in 2010, and it has been a group of people who worked on the 50, 173 and 74 standards, which are dealing with cabling in data centers. And they decided to also try to compile a standard for the availability requirements of a data center. And we started in 2010 with part 1, which holds the general concepts. And this part 1 has been published in 2012, the first time. And this is a top-down concept. After that, there have been developed the part 2 with subparts. That is the part 2.1, building construction, 2.2, power distribution, and 2.3, environmental control, which means air conditioning and ventilation. And these 3 parts have been published in 2014, followed in 2015 by the part 4, telecommunication cabling infrastructure, and in 2016 with the part 2-5, security systems. And also at that time in 2016, it has been published another part of the standard, that is the 3-1, management and operational information, in 2016. Well, at the end, it is a very vital standard. There are a lot of ideas, and even today, they are working on different extensions of the standard. During the last 4 years, we see coming up a part 4 on energy efficiency, describing and introducing different KPIs for energy efficiency. And also it has been added the part 99 with technical reports And they are dealing with the energy management best practices, environmental sustainability, and the number 99-3, a guidance how to use the EN 5600 series. But today, it's also, the working group is also dealing with other subjects which should supplement the whole standard elements. That is the part 5 on maturity. And here maturity means energy efficient, the maturity on energy efficiency of a data center. And there is a draft version of the part 5-1 maturity. And the part 3 will be extended, that the one part which exists since 2016 will be split into 3 different parts, dealing with the process requirements, with the operation and the management. And also there is a small group around Mr. Müller in Berlin, who is working on resilience KPIs for data center infrastructures. And as you have seen before, if we speak about the certification of data centers according to EN 5600, then these parts are the important parts, and the requirements we use in our criteria catalog are derived from these indicated parts of the EN 5600. All right, that is the setup of the EN 5600. And the certification coverage is in more or less the same way done also by other companies. Let's go to the classification system. Well, the EN 5600 explains also in part 1 its scope. And the scope is that it describes general aspects on the facilities and the mission critical infrastructure which supports the data center operation. It specifies a classification system which deals with availability, security, and energy efficiency. And it describes general design principles. For the classification system, there is no uniform classification system given in the EN 5600. We have 3 different systems. There is a classification on availability with class 1 to class 4. We have protection classes resulting in protection zones. These protection classes deal with unauthorized access, internal environmental events and external environmental events. And we have, for the energy efficiency, granularity levels for the measurement of energy. And I will explain all 3 of them. That is first the availability class, but first of all, I just want to mention the conformance clause of the EN 5600, because here it is also mentioned that you have to use these classes, this classification class. If you want to be conform to the EN 5600, you have to do several things. The first is a business risk analysis. The second is you have to select an availability class. depending on your business, depending on your kind of operation of the data center. The third is that you have to choose appropriate protection clauses for the different areas of the data center or different rooms. And in some parts of the EN 5600, there are strict requirements on the protection class to be used, like on the white space of a data center or the technical space where you have the distribution systems for the mechanical systems as well as the electrical systems. Then you have to select an appropriate energy efficiency enablement level, that is the granularity level on the measurement. And you should apply the design process as defined in the EN 5600 and the design principles. And we have the classification system. The well-known part is, of course, the availability classes, which are defined for the electrical systems, for the mechanical systems, and for the cabling systems. So the corresponding EN 5600 standards are the 2-2 up to the 2-4. The availability classes, well, the major natures given here, they have some special characteristics, among some others, of course, but I don't have the time to go into detail here. The availability class 1 is that it says you have a single path and a component which supports your data center operation. The availability class 2 relies on a redundancy for the components, but you have still one single path for the supply. An availability class 3 is defined by a multipath design and a solution for repairing a component during operation. So that is, of course, possible that you can cut one of the paths and you have still the supply via the other path. And the availability class 4 is defined by at least two paths and a redundancy of 2n. So you have the components providing their support to the IT on the one path as well as on the other path. These are the availability classes of the EN 5600. Then we have different protection classes. At the moment, we have 3 protection classes. One protection class deals with the unauthorized access. And here there are 4 different protection classes defined. And what kind of protection class you have to use for special technical rooms, these are given in the 2-2 and 2-3 part of the EN 5600. So for the electrical system and the mechanical system. Depending on your risk analysis, you have to choose a protection class concerning internal environmental events, as well as protection classes dealing with the external environmental events. And they address fire events, electromagnetic interference, vibration, flooding, gas ingress, or dust. And these are the protection classes. And keep in mind, there will be the protection class on unauthorized access, which is more or less restrict but can be adjusted concerning your risk analysis. And for the update of some of the parts of the EN 5600 in the future, we will have 4 protection clauses. Here, the protection class for unauthorized access will be splitted in a part unauthorized access and the other part intrusion protection. The third classification system is the granularity levels for energy efficiency enablements. And here it is defined to which extent you do your measurement on the energy consumption. On level 1, you have a very rough measurement. A concept provides simple general information for the entire data center. So you can decide on the what kind or how much energy is used for the facility stuff and how much energy is used for the IT stuff. For level 2, you need a more sophisticated measurement concept and going in more depth to your distribution systems. So you have a lot of more measuring points where you do your metering. And on level 3, you have to do the measurement of the energy usage on the socket level. And this is explained a little bit more in this graphic that you see here, that the granularity level 1 is about in this area. The subdistribution is covered by the granularity level 2. And on a socket level, we are on granularity level 3. All right. What's going on the EN 5600 right now? Well, first of all, from the EN 5600 is maintained by the European Senelec Standard Organization. And here, as I told before, we see a lot of vital work on different parts of the EN 5600. The ones which are gray, they are those where new work is done, but we see also updates on existing parts of the EN 5600. And these are indicated here. In 2019, in autumn of 2019, there have been updates published of the EN 5600 concerning part 1, concerning the power distribution and the environmental control. We expect the update on the 2-1 and 2-5 soon. I think it will happen in the first half of this year, that we see also the update of the building construction part and the security systems. And I'm pretty sure that we see the 2-4 update up to the end of the year, as well as the management and operational part. There is one more aspect, that there is not only a development on the Senelec level, so on the European level, but there is also a lot of work in the on the ISO level, because in 2018, one special part of the ISO decided to take the EN 5600 concept, to take the definitions and the requirements over into into an ISO standard, and that is the 22237. And in the German group, at the very beginning, I have been alone, but I also have some colleagues who are working on the European level. That is Volkmar Bent and Mark Wilkins, for example. They are also engaged in the Senelec part. And we also have 2 people engaged on the ISO level. And during the last 3 years, a lot of work is done, a lot of agreement is done on the original EN 5600 parts. And now we expect in this year the first 3 ISO standards, which are very, very similar to the EN 5600, part 1, as well as the part 2-2 and 2-3, which dealing with power distribution and environmental control. And I think this will give another boost to the whole set of EN 5600 standard, as well as on the ISO level. And we have already inquiries from Asia and Middle East who want to make an assessment on the basis of our TSI EN 5600 criteria catalog. So when we do the assessment of the EN 5600, I want to explain to you also a little bit our evaluation and certification approach. And as you can imagine, I already told you that we have a criteria catalog, the TSI EN 5600, and that is the native assessment catalog for the EN 5600. It only deals with the EN 5600, but we provide our service of data center assessments since 2001, so for the last 20 years. And we did it with a criteria catalog compiled by our own, and this is called the TSI standard. So in 2016, when all of the relevant parts of the EN 5600 has been published, we decided to apply the EN 5600 requirements also to our standard catalog. So today, you have 2 opportunities to get an EN 5600 certificate based either on the TSI EN 5600 catalog or the standard catalog. Both are able to cover all the requirements of the EN 5600. And when we look to our customers, the EN 5600 catalog has been published from our side in 2017. And right now, well, by my belly feeling, I would say we have 3 EN 5600 certificates based on the native catalog, TSI EN 5600, but we have 20 or 25 certificates based on our TSI standard catalog. What the reason for that is, I will explain on the next slide. But first of all, the TSI standard is tailored for the EN 5600, but it enables us even to do more with this criteria catalog. It does not only confirm the EN 5600, it can also give a qualified assessment on tandem data centers. We call it dual site data centers on different locations. We can do with this catalog also a confirmation on energy efficiency concerning the PUE. And we can also make proofs of concepts of modular data centers. This is all incorporated into the TSI standard. The question, why are so many people or customers using the standard catalog instead of the TSI EN 5600 catalog, has one simple reason. And this I try to explain on the next slide. If you see the typical certificates in the market, this is of course uptime certificates, EN 5600 certificates, as well as our TSI certificates. The classification schemes are very different. If you look to the uptime, there is a very strong focus on the electrical system, on the air conditioning and ventilation systems, or the mechanical system, as well as the facility operation. And here you will know that we have tier 1 to tier 4, and this is applied to these 3 sections: power, air conditioning, ventilation, and organization. If you look to the EN 5600, we have also the classification of the availability system. These are these 3 columns on cabling, power, and air conditioning. We have protection classes which are used in the part security, that is the 2-5. But we don't have any classification. We don't have any classification in the environment, in the construction, in the fire protection, and in the organization of the EN 5600. And now if you look to the TSI, there is a uniform classification on all of the different aspects of a data center. We are speaking of level 1 to level 4, and you have the levels applied not only on the supply systems, but also on the supporting systems like fire protection security systems, on the building construction, as well as on the environment or the documentation. And this is very uniform, and this allows us to compare TSI certified data centers in a much more strictly way than this can be done by EN 5600 and the uptime. And there's one more aspect, that is the business risk analysis. This makes it a little bit more complicated and difficult to compare data centers, because all the assessment depends on the customer's risk analysis. And our experience on the projects we did for certification according to EN 5600 is that when the TSI EN 5600 catalog is chosen, then we expect also the detailed reasoning in the business risk analysis why it is necessary or not necessary to implement this or this in this criteria or in that criteria. There are a lot of criteria depending on the risk analysis, and you have to explain in your risk analysis why you use why or how you would like to implement measures to handle special risks. For the TSI standard catalog, here your business risk analysis can be a one-pager because you have to have a reasoning that in your business you see risk which makes it necessary to have a level 3 data center or a level 4 data center or a level 2 data center. It's much easier. And therefore, it's for me a little bit understandable that the customers choose the TSI standard catalog, making it much easier and not to have a very, very detailed risk analysis. So here you can choose your level. And the certification process, well, this is done like in all other standard audits or inspections. We start with a document analysis. You have to provide your risk analysis, your security concept, your floor plans, your schematics, your calculations, your data sheets on all the components you are using. And this is analyzed in our office in Essen. Then we do the inspection of the data center with, in most cases, with 4 people for 2 days. After that, we compile the evaluation report, which is sent to the certification body. The certification body decides on the correct or on the that the evaluation process has been conducted correctly and checks the results on that, and then the certification body decides on issuing the certificate or not. And in some cases, the certificate is provided and issues with some conditions, and these conditions have to be fulfilled during the next 6 months. And if there are conditions on the certificate, there will be a supplemental audit or a post-audit to check whether now all the conditions have been fulfilled by the customer. That is the certification process. And my last 2 or 3 slides deal with the sustainability. And here, if we look once again to the EN 5600, I think you see there's now also a very big part on sustainability. That is the part 4 on energy efficiency, the maturity part of part 5, and in the part 99, that especially the 99-2, the environmental sustainability, is the one where we hear in the next talk also some details. This is the coverage of the EN 5600 concerning sustainability. And we also see a big move to data center sustainability, a lot of initiatives of the European authorities, and we also see the importance. Therefore, we supplemented our services in two different ways. We try to address all these parts also, which are made yellow here in the slide, by two approaches. Energy efficiency for data centers. We think we are ready for the big move, and this is done in a more simple way by the confirmation of a PUE of a data center. This is an add-on on our TSI certificates, because when we do the TSI certification, we get a deep insight in the electrical system and the mechanical system. So it's quite easy for us to check whether measurements are done at the correct locations, whether measurements are according to the EN 5600 4.2, and whether the aggregation of the data has been done correctly for 1 year. So is the PUE comparable and derived from the parameters as in other data centers and according to the EN 5600. And if this is the case, we put an additional label on our TSI certificates. So that is one approach from our side. And the second one is that I think for 7 or 8 years, we have a trusted site energy efficiency certificate, and we have refurbished it this year and call it TSE standard version 2.0. And this is based on an energy management system according to ISO 50001 and the implementation of best practices according to the Code of Conduct, the technical report 99-1, as well as the draft standard 5600 5-1. And this is a maturity model in 4 levels. So at the very beginning, we check and confirm that an energy management system has been set up in the data center. In the second level, we check whether all the measurements are done at the correct locations in the system, as well as what parts of the best practices have been implemented. On the third level, we check the results of 1 year measurements. And on the level 4, we check whether there are some improvements from 1 year to the next year. And here we accompany the customers for 4 years or even longer if they want to hold the level 4 certificate. So a lot of stuff. Thank you very much. And now I would like to hand over again to Steen. And if there are any questions at the end of the session, I'm very happy to answer them.
Yes, I'll give the stage to Nick van der Pas. He will do the following presentation.
All right.
I have to unmute. Probably you can hear me now, but not yet see me.
Yes.
Okay, so I have to do the next trick and go for my camera. Okay, whether it's going here, probably.
Perfect. Yeah, we can see you.
It's getting better. Okay.
Great.
And then the third trick is to share my screen. So okay, that's okay. Sharing my screen, and I'm going to share this one and share. And I hope you can see me now.
Perfect. Yeah, we see your presentation.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joachim, for for all what you presented. And to start with, the things what I will present now are, you already touched them all. So I will go in some parts in detail, but it was so extensive what you all touched and explained about 5600. I will do some details, and later in the discussion then we can discuss on what is the best way and where to go forward. As you can see my slide here. Already introduced by Stijn, but I want to mention one thing extra, and I got a last slide on it, and that is on the Dutch Standard Committee. And we are quite active in the 5600. And as you already mentioned, the 5600 started in 2010. The Dutch Standardization Group on Data Centers started 2 years earlier. So what we did, we started already in the Netherlands with a standard, and then from Europe there came the initiative from TC2 and Farm to do a European standard. And then we said, okay, then it's better for us to join what's happening in Europe. Then we try to create a standard of our own in the Netherlands. We already had what in the Netherlands was called the praktijkrichtlijn underway. So we said, okay, we're going to continue that, but we're going to support the European part. And what we actually did is that the structure of the standard of the 5600 was already detailed in the Netherlands. So we presented to the European group, and it was quite easily adopted. And that's also the part with the 3 pillars on energy efficiency, on availability and security, that those parts came into the standard. So that's work done in the first part, what I'm mentioning here on the Dutch Standardization Committee, Computer Ruimtes and Data Centers. At that time, I wasn't sharing, but I was supporting it and helped in it. Myself, I'm working for Minkels in Veghel in the south of the Netherlands, and Minkels is part of Legrand. And just to mention, some of you maybe don't know Legrand, but it's an international operating company, about 40,000 people employed. And we have a special group concentrating on all kinds of solutions related to data centers. And within that group, I'm coordinating everything what has to do with standards. I do it in the European part, but also quite often together with other parts in the world. And we see that, and that's the good thing about standards, that they are, and specifically for IT, they are very similar if they are applicable in the Netherlands as they are applicable in other countries. There might be some small items we change and are a little bit different, but most of the time they are quite similar. Myself, I'm concentrating on contributing on the M5600, did that from the beginning. And what is mentioned here, as soon as it has to do with energy efficiency and environmental part, that has my special attention. And as the way in which a data center can be assessed and looked at and be certified according to the 5600, there's also a very important part, and one of them is design POE, because in the design phase, you also can use the standard. So it is very important to have early involvement of people understanding the standard if you plan to have a new data center, because there are a lot of principles which are within the standard which can be used, and one is design POE. And my motto a little bit is the POE of a data center is the POE you choose. So it's not a result, but it's a choice. If you say, I want to build a data center with a POE of 1.1, that's possible. Maybe not always easy, but it's possible. So it should not be a result at the end, but you should look at it in an early stage. Well, you already saw this picture a couple of times. I'm now going to concentrate on the part on 4.x, so the KPI part. Already touched the 99 part, and what's really new, the 5-X part, the maturity model. And here again, already mentioned, but here you got the parts, and this is the 5600 4-2, which is equivalent or almost equivalent to ISO IEC part. And this is the most well-known, is power use effectiveness. And as said, it is within ISO, it is developed, and actually to be more accurate, it is within ISO IEC. This is a collaboration between the ISO part, which make general standards, and the IEC part, which makes standards for the electrotechnical committee and electrotechnical world. They got a joint technical committee, and they together they make all the standards related to IT, and that's a special group doing this. So standards created by this group are then also labeled ISO IEC. And what you see is there is a close collaboration between the international group who's making the ISO IEC standards and the European parts. Some parts are developed in Europe and then brought to the international group, and some the other way around. So what you see here, for instance, is that at the moment, the energy reuse factor is already published in Europe, and it is still under development, which is here with an asterisk, is still under development at an international level. So some parts are developed in Europe and some parts are developed internationally. But the goal is always to have it as uniformly as possible. There's a lot of effort at the moment in finalizing these last two, WE, water use effectiveness, and carbon use effectiveness. And I must say it's very typical that in the beginning when we started with this, well, this is work which is originally started by the Green Grid, but then the Green Grid also asked the International Standardization Organization, please make a standard out of it. In the beginning, there wasn't that much attention, and now it's coming into final draft, and suddenly we see a lot of attention. And I don't know if this has to do with all the political interest suddenly in data centers, but we're having a lot of extra input of also big parties involved in data centers, which I think is a very good thing, because the only way to really evaluate how good data centers are doing things, and it might be evaluation looking at how good you improve, is to measure. And this is why the KPIs are for, to have a uniform way of measuring the standards or measuring the different properties of a data center. Now jumping to the 99-1, which is one of the parts of the 5600, but this is a technical report. So this is a little bit different to a standard, and the setup is a little bit different. It is actually based completely on the way the EU Code of Conduct was set up. You got here a QR code. If you scan this, or if you go to the link below here, you can have the EU Code of Conduct report for free, which is not the case with standards. But if you want to have a look at it and what's in it and work with it, it's very easy to access and look at the best practices. They had a lot of influence already in building data centers and looking at data centers. So it's a very interesting part and easy accessible. 99-1. So jump shortly back. Sorry, the 1 is on energy management and the 2 is on environmental sustainability. So this has to do with all the other parts which have to do with sustainable, which aren't energy. And it is partly life cycle analysis, etc. You might sometimes look at it as, okay, but is this typical for data centers? No, it's not always typical for data centers. So there are a lot of things in this, like here, the plan or the figure I got here, it is on life cycle analysis, which is exactly the same for other industry. But it seems that in certain parts, we're going a little bit ahead of others, of the other industries. That's, although I'm on this slide, I'm going back to this slide. What we see here, for instance, is we got a standard at this moment in data centers calling the renewable energy factor. So it looks at the percentage of renewable. Well, this is exactly the same if you would measure it for a data center as if you would do it for another factory or another industry. So it's not typical for the data center industry, but we see that we are walking a little bit ahead. And I think that's the same with where Stijn started with, that at this moment already 88% of the energy used in data centers in the Netherlands is renewable energy. So it's going we are a little bit ahead of the rest quite often. So, okay, back to the 99-2. So this one is on environmental sustainability. And so we're having those two technical reports, the 99-1 and the 99-2. And they actually at this moment come together, as already mentioned by Joachim, in the 5-1, which is the maturity model. And maybe some of you say, okay, heard before of the maturity model. Yeah, that is true. There is a maturity model of the green grid. And it's, well, almost 10 years old. And about 7-8 years ago, the ISO-IC committee tried to make a standard out of it. But it worked out that it's very hard to make a standard out of the maturity model of the green grid. So a year ago, about a little bit longer ago, there was a new attempt started, but now in Europe. And what we did in the beginning, we limited it. We said, okay, we do have the 99-1 and we have the 99-2. So that are the first two parts we are looking at. Although you see here in this spider diagram that it is not only maturity on environmental stuff, but it is on other, well, here's environmental control, but there are other parts of what's in the 5600 which can be put in a model and having, you can give a certain maturity. As mentioned by Joachim, there are different levels. There is at the moment discussion whether it's 4 or 5 levels. So Joachim said there were 4 levels. Well, this is still under discussion. It is not finalized yet, but a big plus of the technical specification, which is the 5600-5-1 at the moment, is that it is not a standard, but a technical specification, and we can develop it a little bit faster. So I already expect at the end of the year, maybe early next year, that there will be publication of this maturity model. And that's what we really want to do, is we want to publish it. And then we hope that the industry start using it and looking at it. Okay, can we use it? And what can we do with it? And that's what we hope, if, or depending on how well it works, that we get feedback. And if we get feedback, we can improve the standard. And how can we give feedback? And I come to this one, with you can become involved in standards, which is quite easy in the Netherlands. We have a group under the governance of NEN, doing all that stuff with creating the EN 5600. We're doing that now almost 13 years, creating these standards. And there is well, a couple of people are really, well, with a lot of effort are trying to improve the standards. That's actually my part on what's happening here. And if there are questions in the discussion, because I think later on the floor will be open to discussion, please ask. And I would like to give back the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. All right. I think we could answer some questions, Joachim. We also received some questions in the chat, mostly for you. Maybe you can answer a few of those questions.
I will try. I will try. Thank you. I just share my screen once again.
Yep.
Well, there has been one question concerning the comparison of the ISO 22237 and the EN 5600. And as Nick showed on his slides, we see that there is a very strong correspondence on the part 4, because the development is in some way in sync with the EN 5600 group. And the other parts, that is the part 1 and the part 2 and the part 3, these are the three parts which are adapted to the ISO standard. And I can show it once again on this.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that, Joachim, that at this moment what we did there is the last revision we had on the complete EN 5600 was first passed in Europe. So we did all the voting and all the stuff in Europe. And then we passed actually the previous one with all the European comments. We passed them through to the international group, where the main contributors are the United States, Japan, Korea, who has most international influence. And so, for instance, there's also a part which we didn't mention on earthquake, and the Japanese put a lot of effort in that because they're really specialists in that area. So, but the let's say the main collaboration in this part is done, and Europe is working there as one group, and we try to synchronize as much as possible. But we really, sometimes it's very good to have extra international comments, and they improve the standard really.
Yeah. So the next question is, what is the difference between the EN 5600 and other standards like Uptime, BICSI, TIA 942? Well, at the end, I would say that about 80% is the same on all these standards, because all these standards deal with data center availability, and therefore the approaches are in some way similar. But of course, there are differences in how to use these standards and for what purpose have they been introduced. The TIA 942 is originally a cabling standard for data centers, and only in the appendix the working group on this standard has made up their minds on availability thoughts of data center, and they created in this standard an appendix which is only informative. So it's not really part of the standard itself. And well, we tried also to make assessments according to TIA 942, but it's quite difficult because the wording and the strict explanation on requirements differs a little bit from section to section, which makes it difficult to use this. The BICSI is also an organization on cabling. And here, for example, one of my colleagues, Volkmar Bent, has been involved in the BICSI standard on data centers. It's very American driven, I would say. It takes into account the special design on electrical systems in the States. Nevertheless, it also has a classification system. It addresses all the parts which are also addressed in the EN 5600 concerning building construction, power distribution, air conditioning, cabling, security, and a little bit on management and operation. And the uptime, as I already tried to explain on one of my slides, they are also in the market since 2004, 2005. And well, they have their own scheme with the tier approach. And they focus on they focus especially on the supply systems. I'll try to show it here, where there is a quite good consensus on what has to be addressed in such a standard for data center design. You see that it is very similar in the TSI as in the EN 5600, as well as in BICSI, for example. But the uptime has a very strong focus on the electrical system and the air conditioning system and on the operation of a data center. And there is another point you have to take into account. That is, the uptime is a private company which set up their requirements by their own. And the EN 5600 is created from a standards organization with a lot of agreement work on all the working groups who contribute to the EN 5600. So that is the first difference. And the second difference is the acting parties who are working or make the assessment according to some normative document. The assessment on the uptime is with the tier model is done by the uptime. The assessment of the EN 5600 or TSI is done by different companies. One of these companies is TÜViT. And now it is the question whether there is the knowledge and the competence of the people doing this assessment, and are there other mechanics given to guarantee that these assessments are done correctly. And this is given in the European context with the accreditation. So, for example, our certification body is accredited by the German accreditation authority, and therefore there is some guarantee that all these assessments are done in a similar way with qualified people, with the same processes. So that is also one difference between uptime and the companies working with EN 5600 assessments.
And maybe to add to that, Joachim, you said it was one of the weak points of, or the not that easy points of the EN 5600 is the risk assessment point. But yeah, I prefer to put it the other way around. A little bit like, well, Kennedy said when they want to go to the moon, he said they're not doing it because it's easy, but because it's hard. And it's because you can learn a lot of it. And I think that is the crucial part of the 5600 on the risk assessment and on the business risk assessment mode, that a lot of companies don't do it. They just say, okay, I want to have a tier 4, but they have no idea why they need a tier 4. Like you said, if you have a double data center, maybe a tier 2 or a class 2 can be enough. So it is very important and critical to do the risk assessment and to do also the business risk assessment. And I know it is hard for you to say, okay, this is what you want and this is what you have to do, and now you comply to the standard. But I think this is one of the powerful parts and also the unique parts of the 5600 and the I2IEC one, is that it diverts a little bit there from what tier is doing. And that is on that part. And the same as the other part, what you mentioned. You have the 3 pillars, which is security is added to it, and which is the environmental parts, which is to it. And at this moment, all the management part is added to it. So I think the 5600 is even a bigger package than it is than the BICSI and the uptime tier classification.
Definitely, it is the bigger package. And I agree to you that you say there is potential on the business risk analysis. But what I mean is that adapting the EN 5600, you have to do the risk analysis downstripped to special requirements. And it is very difficult for people to decide whether they really need an intrusion protection on the resistance class 2 or 3 or 4. That's very difficult for them. And once again, just on the idea of comparison, we wouldn't have in Europe a standard explaining or defining or specifying the size of a power socket by a risk analysis. In that case, you can go in this country, you never will put your connector to this socket because it does not fit. So therefore, if we speak on from a technical point of view, it's quite good to specify it directly without a risk analysis.
Okay, but if we would use the risk analysis, we cannot use a light bulb, because if something is unsafe, is the fitting of the light bulb. But okay, there's some history to that. But and that's the same with the history in data centers, and that is also, and we have to say that I think the whole tier and classification of the Uptime Institute did a lot of good things in data centers and let people understand that there are classifications and you have things to choose. But I think with the 5600, it can be professionalized.
All right.
All right. Not sure if there's any further questions.
There was one more question. Does TÜViT apply the electrical topology with non-gen set usage, no alternative source confirmed in the EN 5600 under the required conditions?
Well, that is at least a question for our electrical engineers. I'm not an electrical engineer, but as far as I know, the EN 5600 does not allow well, it depends on the availability class, but on availability class 3, you need either a primary and secondary source, or if you only have primary resources, which means that a substation from the energy provider is the only source, then you need an additional source by gen sets, for example, or any other technology.
Yes, I think the EN 5600 tries to be technology agnostic and just define it by that you need an independent supply, and it doesn't, and it has to have a certain availability, but it doesn't say it has to be a generator. It can be something else than a generator.
Definitely, but yeah.
All right. I don't see any other raised hands. Let me check one more time. No, well, I think the presentations were all quite clear. Well, then I think I want to thank you for your time today and for your presentations. The presentation has been recorded, and we will also make sure to send it to you after the session and also publish it on the DDA website. If you have any further questions, you can always email them personally, of course. And yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.